Welcome to The Hidden Truth, True Crime Story. In today's chilling episode, we'll delve into the twisted lives of notorious serial killers, their terrifying methods, and the gruesome impact they left on the world. These killers were not just criminals, they were shadows who walked among us, hiding in plain sight, luring their victims into deadly traps. From unsolved mysteries to jaw-dropping confessions, we'll uncover the truth behind some of the most infamous killers in history. Hold on tight, because what you're about to hear is not for the faint of heart. Section 1: The Psychology Behind the Monsters. Before we dive into the details of specific serial killers, let's first try to understand what makes someone like this. What drives a person to commit such horrendous acts? And how do they blend in with society for so long, often without raising suspicion? It's a chilling question that has fascinated experts and the general public alike for decades. To truly comprehend the behavior of serial killers, we must take a deep dive into the complex psychology behind these individuals, uncovering the twisted paths that lead them to commit such monstrous acts. Psychologists and criminologists have long sought to unravel the psychological makeup of serial killers, and while there is no single, definitive answer, many have pointed to a combination of childhood trauma, mental illness, and environmental factors that shape their behavior. The argument is that serial killers often develop their violent tendencies as a result of a broken or abusive upbringing. Many of these killers experienced significant trauma in their early years, including neglect, physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. These formative experiences can distort a person's worldview, causing them to lack empathy for others and to view violence as an acceptable means of exerting control. For example, early childhood neglect or abuse can instill feelings of abandonment, rejection, and low self-worth. When these emotions are left unresolved, they can lead to a profound sense of powerlessness, which some individuals attempt to remedy by lashing out at others. In some cases, this manifests as a violent need to assert control over their environment, control that was denied to them during their formative years. It's a vicious cycle where their childhood trauma feeds into their adult behavior, and the more they engage in violence, the more they become numb to the emotional consequences of their actions. However, it's important to note that not all serial killers have a history of abuse. While many display patterns of behavior that suggest early trauma played a role in their development, there are cases where the absence of such experiences raises additional questions. Some killers, like Ted Bundy, come from relatively stable families with no apparent signs of abuse. Bundy's charm and intelligence made it all the more difficult for anyone to see the dark side of him, a side that would emerge in horrifying ways. In cases like Bundy's, mental illness and personality disorders may play a larger role in the development of their violent tendencies. For example, psychopathy and narcissistic personality disorder are often cited as key contributors to serial killers' lack of empathy and disregard for human life. It is also crucial to recognize that some serial killers are driven by an unexplainable urge or compulsion to kill, something that goes beyond rational thought or conscious decision-making. This urge can be overpowering, making the killer feel as though they are unable to control their actions. These killers often view their violence as a means of satisfying an internal need, one that cannot be quelled through normal societal means. They may rationalize their behavior through a distorted view of reality, believing that their victims somehow deserve their fate, or they may simply be so detached from normal human emotions that they view killing as a mere game or experiment. But perhaps the most significant driving force behind serial killers is the overwhelming desire for power. Many of these killers are motivated by a deep-seated need to control others. This desire for dominance often manifests in the way they plan and execute their crimes, which are often meticulously thought out and executed with precision. The element of control is critical to understanding their behavior. To a serial killer, the act of taking a life is not simply about inflicting physical harm, it is about asserting total power over their victims. They are in complete control of their victim's fate, and the act of murder becomes a way for them to feel superior, invincible, and untouchable. In many cases, the serial killer is not simply interested in killing for the sake of killing, but in the entire process, the stalking, the manipulation, the psychological torment. These killers may spend days, weeks, or even months carefully planning their next move, honing their skills, and preparing their next victim. The hunt becomes as important as the kill itself. The victim often becomes an object, something to be controlled and manipulated. This control extends beyond the physical act of murder. In some cases, serial killers take great pleasure in tormenting their victims psychologically before they are killed. This manipulation serves to make the killer feel superior and in command of every aspect of the situation. For some, this obsession with control and dominance extends to law enforcement and society as a whole. These killers often find excitement in evading capture, viewing their ability to remain undetected as a game or a personal victory. Their egos grow with every passing day without capture, and they begin to see themselves as untouchable. For them, the thrill of outsmarting the police becomes just as rewarding as the act of murder itself. They are able to look society in the eye, knowing they can elude capture and continue their reign of terror at will. It is this sick sense of superiority and invincibility that makes these killers so terrifying, not just for their victims, but for society as a whole. Another aspect of their psychology is their ability to compartmentalize their violent acts. Serial killers are often able to maintain a facade of normalcy, blending into society without raising suspicion. They may have families, jobs, and social circles, and on the surface, they appear like any other person. This ability to compartmentalize is part of what makes serial killers so dangerous. They lead double lives, hiding their true selves behind a mask of normalcy. The public sees one thing, while beneath the surface, a monster lurks. This double life is often accompanied by a chilling ability to manipulate others. Serial killers are frequently described as charming, persuasive, and able to establish rapport with those around them. This charm is often a key factor in their ability to lure victims. People trust them, believing they are harmless, and thus fall victim to their carefully laid traps. The killer, meanwhile, is able to keep their true intentions hidden, playing the role of the harmless neighbor, the friendly coworker, or the devoted partner, while secretly plotting their next crime. One of the most frightening aspects of serial killers is their ability to maintain this facade for extended periods, sometimes even years. This ability to hide in plain sight and evade detection is what makes them so difficult to catch. It is only when they slip up, or when the pressure of their increasingly violent urges becomes too great, that they are finally brought to justice. In sum, the psychology of serial killers is a complex and chilling topic. It is a combination of childhood trauma, mental illness, and a need for power and control that drives them to commit their heinous acts. Serial killers are not born overnight, they are made through years of internal struggle, manipulation, and distortion of reality. Understanding the psychological factors that contribute to their behavior is key to preventing future crimes, and to understanding how such monsters can exist within the fabric of society without anyone suspecting their true nature. Their ability to blend into society, manipulate others, and maintain control over their environment makes them some of the most dangerous individuals in the world. These killers are not simply criminals. they are predators who feed off fear, power, and control. And the frightening reality is that they could be anyone, anywhere, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. Section 2: The early years of the killer's life. For some notorious serial killers, their story begins long before their horrific crimes. Understanding the early years of these individuals is essential to comprehending the dark path they would eventually follow. It is during these formative years that the seeds of violence are often planted, whether through neglect, abuse, or a series of life events that would alter their course forever. The circumstances of their childhood are often key indicators of the psychological forces at play, which would eventually lead to the terrifying behaviors that defined their later lives. Take the case of Ted Bundy, one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. Born in 1946 in Burlington, Vermont, Bundy's early years were marked by a significant level of confusion regarding his family structure. Bundy's mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was young and unmarried when she gave birth to him, and his early years were spent in the care of his grandparents. Bundy grew up under the mistaken belief that his mother was his sister, a lie that was perpetuated by his family. This unusual and emotionally distressing family dynamic created confusion for Bundy, who often struggled with a sense of identity and belonging. Although his grandmother was reportedly loving and protective, the lack of a stable, transparent family structure likely contributed to Bundy's growing sense of isolation and estrangement. As Bundy grew older, he began to display unsettling behaviors that would later be identified as early signs of violent tendencies. His charm, intelligence, and good looks masked the inner turmoil that he was experiencing. Bundy would later use these traits to manipulate others, but in his youth, he was already struggling with feelings of rejection and inadequacy. This need for control and validation would later manifest in his heinous acts, as Bundy sought to dominate and control his victims, just as he had always longed to control aspects of his own life. It was during his college years that Bundy's fantasies of violence became more apparent. These fantasies would later evolve into real-life crimes as Bundy's desire for power escalated. In his mind, the act of violence was not just about satisfying a dark urge, it was about achieving the power and control that he had been denied in his early years. Similarly, the childhood of John Wayne Gacy, a man who would later earn the nickname the Killer Clown, was filled with a series of tragic events that would shape his destiny in a horrifying way. Born in 1942, Gacy grew up in a troubled household, dominated by an abusive father who frequently belittled and physically abused him. His father was a violent alcoholic who often taunted Gacy for his perceived weaknesses, calling him sissy and lazy. This bullying behavior had a profound impact on Gacy's self-esteem, and the sense of powerlessness he felt as a child would stay with him for the rest of his life. Gacy's relationship with his father was tense and deeply troubled, which added to the confusion and emotional pain that plagued his formative years. In addition to the abuse he suffered at home, Gacy also struggled with his sexuality, something that further complicated his emotional development. Growing up in the 1940s and 1950s, homosexuality was not only socially stigmatized but also criminalized, which created a profound sense of shame and confusion for Gacy. As a teenager, Gacy was conflicted about his sexual identity, and this internal turmoil added to the already chaotic and violent emotions he was experiencing. As he moved into adulthood, Gacy sought acceptance and validation through power. He started a successful business, established a family, and even became active in local politics, presenting himself as a well-adjusted, community-minded man. But beneath this facade, Gacy harbored a dark and violent nature, one that would emerge when he began his series of brutal killings. Gacy's early attempts to gain power and acceptance were achieved through manipulation and the creation of a false identity, a tactic that he would continue throughout his life. He worked hard to maintain a reputation as an upstanding, respectable man while secretly harboring an insatiable desire for control and domination. His killings were not just random acts of violence. They were carefully planned and executed to satisfy his need to feel superior and powerful. The man who appeared to be a caring husband, father, and business owner was, in reality, a monster hiding in plain sight. This duality, being able to maintain a facade of normalcy while secretly engaging in horrific crimes, was a trait shared by many notorious serial killers. It's a theme seen across many notorious killers. Their early years were marked by signs of profound emotional distress or a yearning for control that went unnoticed by those around them. The experiences they endured during their formative years were critical in shaping their later violent behaviors, but these early struggles were often invisible to others. In the case of many serial killers, their dark tendencies were well hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy. Many were able to mask their emotional pain and psychological struggles, blending into their communities while hiding the monstrous tendencies lurking beneath the surface. They were often able to maintain relationships, hold jobs, and participate in social activities, all while secretly planning their next move. This ability to hide their true selves was not just a survival mechanism but also a key factor in their success as killers. The better they could blend in, the longer they could continue their rampage without drawing suspicion. For serial killers, the ability to compartmentalize their dark urges and present a facade of normalcy was crucial in evading law enforcement and the public's attention. This psychological manipulation of their outward personas allowed them to move freely, even as they carried out their gruesome acts in secret. In some cases, these early years of emotional turmoil led to a sense of alienation and resentment towards society. Many serial killers felt rejected or misunderstood, leading them to view their victims as nothing more than objects to be used in an effort to regain a sense of control. They saw their crimes not as acts of random violence, but as a way to reassert power over a world that had once made them feel powerless. This need for revenge and retribution, whether conscious or subconscious, was often a driving force behind their killings. For instance, Richard Ramirez, who would later be known as the Night Stalker, was raised in a broken home and suffered significant trauma during his childhood. His father, a violent and abusive man, would beat him and his siblings, creating an atmosphere of fear and anxiety in their home. In addition to the physical abuse, Ramirez was also exposed to the horrors of war and violence at a young age, including witnessing his cousin's brutal murder. These early experiences of violence and trauma may have helped to shape the darkness that would emerge in Ramirez's adult life, culminating in his killing spree. Like other serial killers, his early years were filled with disturbing events that went largely unnoticed by those around him, setting the stage for his violent future. In the case of Aileen Wuornos, another notorious serial killer, her early life was marked by extreme neglect and abuse. Wuornos was abandoned by her mother at a young age and placed in foster care, where she was sexually abused and neglected. Her traumatic upbringing left her emotionally scarred, and as an adult, she turned to prostitution as a means of survival. Her interactions with men, filled with violence and exploitation, eventually led to her murderous spree, where she killed several men in self-defense, according to her accounts, during violent altercations. Like many other killers, Wuornos' early years of neglect and abuse contributed to her emotional instability, and her violent behavior was a tragic culmination of a life filled with trauma. The early lives of these killers reveal the profound impact that childhood experiences can have on one's psychological development. While not every serial killer shares the same background, many exhibit similar patterns of trauma, abuse, and emotional distress. These formative years often serve as the foundation for the twisted behaviors that will unfold later in life. The scars left by neglect, abuse, and rejection can sometimes remain buried deep within a person, only to surface in the most horrifying of ways. Section 3: The First Kill and the Rise of the Monster. Once these killers crossed the line, there was no turning back. The first kill often represents a turning point, a moment when they abandon any remaining trace of humanity and embrace their darkest desires. For many, this first murder is a means of testing their control, confirming their ability to dominate their victim, and experiencing the power they crave. For others, it is a moment of pure compulsion that cannot be ignored or suppressed. Consider Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker, whose first known killing came in 1984. Ramirez's early crimes were driven by a thirst for power, violence, and sadism, marking the beginning of a spree that would terrorize Southern California for years. His killings were not random, they were meticulously planned to inflict as much fear and suffering as possible. Similarly, the case of Jeffrey Dahmer, the infamous Milwaukee cannibal, started with a series of increasingly disturbing murders. Dahmer's first kill, a 19-year-old man, was one of many, but it was his growing obsession with control and his desire to keep his victims with him forever that set him apart from other killers. Dahmer's ability to blend into society while carrying out his atrocities was a haunting reminder of how easily a predator can hide in plain sight. For many serial killers, the escalation from one crime to the next becomes inevitable. Once they have tasted the power that comes with murder, the need to kill becomes stronger, and the killings grow more brazen, more violent, and more frequent. In many cases, they also begin to evolve, learning from their past mistakes and refining their methods. Section 4: The Investigation and the Hunt for the Killer. As the body count rises, so does the pressure on law enforcement to catch the killer. The tension between the authorities and the killer grows, with every new murder amplifying the sense of urgency. But serial killers are often remarkably skilled at evading capture. Whether it's through careful planning, a deep knowledge of criminal investigations, or sheer luck, these killers continue their reign of terror, slipping through the fingers of the authorities time and time again. The investigation process in these cases is often a grueling and exhaustive endeavor that demands not only technical expertise but also an understanding of the killer's psychology. Take the case of the Zodiac Killer, one of the most infamous and elusive serial killers in American history. The Zodiac Killer terrorized Northern California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Committing a series of murders and sending cryptic letters to police and newspapers, taunting them for their inability to catch him. His letters, filled with cryptograms and bizarre messages, were not only a means of toying with authorities but also a psychological weapon. The killer seemed to relish the attention he was getting from the media and the public, often playing games with the investigators, and creating a sense of helplessness and frustration among law enforcement. Despite several attempts to crack the cryptograms and trace the identity of the killer through his letters, the Zodiac was never caught. His true identity remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in true crime history. The lack of physical evidence, coupled with the killer's ability to blend into society, made the investigation particularly difficult. Each murder was methodically executed, and the killer seemed to have a near-supernatural ability to disappear into the night, leaving behind little to no trace. The Zodiac's ability to mock the police and evade capture for so many years became an agonizing pursuit for law enforcement, one that eventually led to dead ends and growing frustration. Despite several suspects over the years, no conclusive evidence has ever emerged that definitively links anyone to the crimes, and the Zodiac's chilling taunts continue to haunt both investigators and the public to this day. Likewise, the investigation into the BTK killer, Dennis Rader, was a chilling example of how a killer can lead investigators on a wild goose chase, hiding in plain sight for decades. The BTK Killer, whose name stood for bind, torture, kill, committed a series of gruesome murders over a span of 30 years in Kansas. Like the Zodiac, Rader's ability to hide in plain sight was central to his longevity as a killer. For over 3 decades, he lived a seemingly normal life as a family man, a church leader, and a respected member of his community. His outward normalcy made him the last person anyone would suspect. While he was living in the community, raising a family, and going to work, he was also sending taunting letters to the police, relishing in the fear and confusion he was causing. What made Rader's case even more unnerving was how he played with investigators, sending letters to law enforcement and the media after each murder, detailing his gruesome crimes in explicit detail. These letters were not just about bragging, they were about maintaining control over the investigation. Rader's letters were methodical and precise, offering just enough information to torment police and lead them down false trails. Despite these taunts, Rader remained undetected for years, slipping through the cracks of the investigation. He continued to kill, playing a dangerous game of cat and mouse with law enforcement. The investigation into Rader's crimes was also complicated by the fact that he had carefully planned his murders, often choosing victims who did not have strong connections to him. His ability to cover his tracks was exceptional, and the fact that his murders were spaced out over such a long period of time meant that investigators had little to go on. It wasn't until 2004, when Rader re-entered the public eye by sending another letter to the media, that his true identity was discovered. In a shocking twist, Rader had made a critical mistake by sending a disc to a local television station, which investigators were able to trace back to his personal computer. This small slip-up led to his arrest, but by that time, Rader had evaded capture for more than 3 decades, continuing his reign of terror without any real fear of getting caught. The ability of killers like the Zodiac and BTK to maintain their anonymity for so long is a terrifying reminder of how dangerous and elusive serial killers can be. It takes immense patience, meticulous planning, and a warped sense of self-preservation for a killer to evade law enforcement for such extended periods. But what makes these cases even more chilling is the psychological toll it takes on investigators. The pressure to catch these killers grows with each passing day, and the personal stakes for law enforcement can be enormous. Investigators are not just trying to solve a case, they are trying to outwit a person who is often just as intelligent, manipulative, and strategic as they are. The killer's ability to stay one step ahead can create a constant sense of frustration and helplessness for those who are trying to stop them. One of the key challenges in these investigations is understanding the psychology of the killer. Serial killers often have a twisted sense of control and power that drives their actions, and this need for control extends to the investigation itself. They know how to manipulate the media and the public, often using them to create confusion, divert attention, and mislead law enforcement. The mind games they play with police can be just as lethal as the murders themselves. The psychological cat-and-mouse game between the killer and the investigators can be exhausting, as law enforcement must not only gather physical evidence but also try to decipher the killer's patterns, motives, and potential next moves. This dynamic was seen in the investigation of the Atlanta child murders, which occurred between 1979 and 1981. Over the course of nearly 2 years, at least 28 children, teenagers, and young adults were murdered, and the city of Atlanta was gripped by fear and panic. The case was complicated by the killer's ability to remain anonymous while continuing to target vulnerable victims. As investigators worked tirelessly to piece together evidence, they faced multiple false leads, and the killer seemed to adapt his methods with every investigation. The hunt for the killer was further complicated by racial tensions, as many of the victims were African American children, and the investigation faced scrutiny from both the media and the public. The eventual arrest of Wayne Williams, who was convicted of 2 of the murders, was not a clean resolution to the case, and questions remain about whether all of the murders were truly his. The toll that these long, drawn-out investigations take on investigators cannot be overstated. They often work tirelessly under immense pressure, with little reward in sight. The psychological strain is compounded by the frustration of knowing that a killer is out there, continuing to claim victims, while they struggle to find even the smallest clue. For many law enforcement officials, solving the case becomes a personal obsession, a driving force that consumes their professional lives. And for the families of the victims, the waiting and uncertainty only add to their grief and trauma. The hunt for a serial killer is a relentless pursuit, and the investigations into these killers are marked by moments of intense pressure, painstaking detective work, and, often, the crushing weight of failure. These cases reveal just how difficult it is to stop a killer who is not only willing to murder, but who is also prepared to play the long game, using manipulation, misdirection, and patience to keep the investigation at bay. In the end, it is a chilling reminder of the monster's ability to control the narrative and of the extreme lengths investigators must go to bring them to justice. Conclusion. Serial killers may be some of the most terrifying figures in history, but their stories also serve as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly normal individuals. The true horror of these cases is not just in the crimes themselves, but in the realization that there are people capable of hiding their monstrous tendencies in plain sight. Thank you for joining us on today's journey into the dark world of serial killers. If you found this episode chilling, be sure to subscribe to The Hidden Truth, True Crime Story for more deep dives into the world's most horrifying cases. And as always, don't forget to hit the like button and share this video with your friends if you want to keep uncovering the dark and disturbing truths that lie hidden in the shadows. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay aware, and never stop searching for the truth.